Okay, so hopefully we are live once again.
There we go.
Huzzah! Okay, so welcome back, everybody. For those of you that are not tuning in live, this is the first time we've gone through this. We didn't definitely had 3 or 4 hiccups the first couple of times around. We are talking about Gazpacho, and I know that we are kind of well, we're kind of giving away a little bit because we went through and talked a little bit about each of these albums. So, do we want to just really quickly summarize why they are where they are?
Sure.
Starting with, and I'll just keep my cursor around here, starting with Bravo, to make sure that everybody and what I'll move these guys so that we can follow through, so that we're not um, we're giving everybody their fair dues. So I think we can start with Bravo and When Earth Lets Go because they're not necessarily completely interchangeable in my mind, but they definitely have the same rating at a D. And I think people actually missed who you were, or I guess who you are, and where we can find you. So do you want to give your proper introduction this time around?
Sure. I'm Brent. For everybody who didn't hear it the first time, I have a Facebook page as well as a YouTube. I host a Friday night radio show, all called the Similitude of Prog.
Yeah.
And I love prog music as much as everybody, and I think I love it as much as Mr. Notes does.
Which is it's a pretty high task there.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, and if you want to follow Brent there, I believe I've left his. It should have appeared in the description. It looks like it's still grabbing the information from March 23rd. I'm going to see if I'll change that for the actual recording to make sure that everybody can follow you as well as, I mean, right now I'll actually just plunk in um, your YouTube channel. So yeah, you can go and follow Brent. And Brent, how did you get into? Because people heard me the first time around. They heard how I got into Gazpacho, but how did you get into Gazpacho?
I got into Gazpacho with the album and Demon in 2014. And that album pretty much changed my life.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I mean, I'd never heard anything so atmospheric, and just the way I fell in love with Jan Henrik's voice, especially. And yeah, I don't know, that whole album is just, if you haven't heard it, go out and grab it. I think it's a good place to start.
There we go. Yeah, it's a great entry point to the band, especially for their more experimental stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I got into Gazpacho with their Night and TikTok album. So we're going to kind of breeze through their first handful of albums, just because we've already talked about them a couple of times. Now, I had mentioned, because I think we can talk about Bravo and When Earth Lets Go kind of in tandem with one another. I feel like Bravo as a whole is a better listen from start to finish, but I still feel
Great.
like When Earth Lets Go has better tracks. Like there's no track on Bravo that's better than those highlighted tracks from When Earth Lets Go, but I think out of the two, I'd rather listen to Bravo as an album.
Oh, I agree 100%. Bravo is a group that's very hungry, where I feel When Earth Lets Go is a little bit lackluster, and maybe they weren't, I don't know, trying as hard, perhaps. Maybe that's a little bit of a strong opinion, but
Yeah, yeah, I could see that. I can see that.
doesn't have that same drive.
Yeah. And then from that, we go into Firebird, which we had put in the B. And because my introduction was Night and TikTok, I never went back and I never listened to Bravo, When Earth Lets Go, or the Firebird outside of what I had heard on their live albums. And even then, they don't really play too much. I know that they played Vulture from Firebird on Night of Demon, which A great
Oh, great. Yeah.
live album. I mean, it's one of the greats in terms of a progressive live album.
Yes, definitely.
That's the one. That's the one. And yeah, I love the tracks on this one. They still had a lot more to do, but you can see the foundations of Night and TikTok on this one.
Yes, definitely.
And so, speaking of Night and TikTok, let's just put those right up where we had originally put them,
Yeah.
which is way up here. As I had mentioned before, I think that they're two different sides of the same coin. Night being the night one, and TikTok being the stark summer day.
Right.
Now, I know that you had mentioned and asked me which one I liked more, and I can't honestly say, but I think you gave a really good speech about which one you liked more. So do you want to kind of summarize that or talk about that a little bit?
I like TikTok just a little bit more. Night is very strong musically, but I think TikTok always reminds me of the reasons I fell in love with progressive rock and why I fell in love with Gazpacho. It just reiterates that every time I hear it. It's like I've rediscovered Yes or I rediscovered Genesis. I just get that feeling when I listen to that album.
Yeah, and both of these, I never get tired to listen to. Like each time when we get to that really big crescendos on those, I have that moment where I have to close my eyes and let the music sink in.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Now, we did talk a little bit about the remastered work, and I know that we talked quite at length of Night because Spotify has both versions of the album.
Yeah.
But we didn't talk too much about the remastered version of TikTok either, because that has the same work where they remastered and remixed it. Yeah.
It's not as noticeable as Night was, but I've got that on LP, and there is some subtle differences, but not many.
I agree. It's not quite as stark as Night, because Night...
Yeah, it's a little warmer.
Yeah, because Night it literally is a different album.
Totally.
Yeah, and with TikTok, there's just a few things that are different on it. Like there's a few keynotes that I think they play a little bit differently, but for the most part, it stays pretty true to form.
Yeah. I think the biggest difference on it is the title track, that they do a little bit of tweaking here and there. There's a slightly different drum feel to it.
I agree, yeah. And I know this was something that I mentioned before, but I love how Winter Is Never flows right into The Dream of Stone, the first track for Night.
Yeah, so that's such a beautiful song.
Generally, that's what I do. I listen to all of TikTok and then go straight into Night.
Let me try that.
For me, it's seamless. Like it feels like the same album. It really, really does.
Yeah, I can totally see that.
Now, this was the only album I think we didn't 100% agree on, which was Missa Atropos. Now, yeah. I still believe that it belongs here in the B section, but I will give your stance.
Okay.
And I will agree, because this was something that I mentioned before, in that because Night and TikTok were the two that I first listened to and I fell in love with, and I had like a year and a half of their music. I was so excited for new Gazpacho tracks. And this feels much more like a Firebird and some of their past stuff. I still feel like some of the title tracks, like some of the individual tracks, are some of their best written and performed tracks. But I also agree with you, and when we listen to it on the London Live album, it breathes a whole new life into those tracks and gives it...
It does. It takes them from a very lackluster kind of, very monotone, and just improves them so much, almost tenfold, in my opinion.
I would agree to that. And if they had that same drive and energy, I would be fighting a little bit more to keep it in the B.
Oh, so would I, because it is a good album on its own. They do not have a bad album, but for that reason, it's... a little lower on the list than maybe it needed to be.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
So now that we've caught ourselves back up to where we were originally, let's move on to March of Ghosts.
Right.
And I'm interested to see where you feel for this one.
I'm going to put March of Ghosts in the B category.
B category. I feel like it's more an A than a B, but I will keep it into the B. The only thing for this one is I usually listen to it on record, and I feel as though it needs to be a single disc and stop after March of Ghosts 3 and then flip over to what's the song that follows it? It's my favorite track off of the album.
Black Lily?
That's the one. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a brilliant song too.
I feel like that should have started the second album or second side, but I still like that track of March of Ghosts 3. I don't know what sounds they're using for that, but oh man, it still gives me shivers. Like it still provides such a array of music on there.
Yeah, that's a beautiful song.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And actually, this is one of the few albums that I have to be careful when I listen to it because I was not necessarily in a great place when I first heard this, and it helped me get through that. And so it was an interesting listen to come back to because it is still one of my favorites of theirs. But yeah, I have to be careful because it'll do things to me.
It's funny that music will do that, isn't it?
It is.
It just takes you back right to that part of your life. And,
sometimes for better and sometimes for worse.
Definitely.
Yeah. So we can move on then to the album that you got into Gazpacho with. So where would you put this guy?
I'm gonna put Gazpacho. I'm gonna put Demon in a B as well.
Interesting. I think I want to veto this one because I want to put this in A.
Okay.
I want to put this one in A. This was the one. So after the two punch of Missa Atropos as well as March of Ghosts, I felt a little not let down, but like they were still putting out good music, but it wasn't on the same scale and same scope of Night and TikTok. And it wasn't until Demon that I felt like they were back on that A game. I love their unconventional use of like track
recorded music.
Yeah, and like not like playing with sounds and doing all these different things to create music and noise with. That plays into the concept of Demon. It made me realize that okay, these guys weren't just a 1-2 punch, and now they're just making good music. They can still make brilliant music.
Yeah, that must be a hard thing to pull off live too, because you can get derailed pretty quick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love how on Night of Demon they do the whole first side of that where it's I've Been Walking part 1 and 2 and the Wizards of I wish I had
Altian Mountains.
That's it. Yeah. And I think it's a perfect representation of the music, very much like how London transcended the music from Missa Atropos. I think they did the same thing on Night of Demon for Demon.
So would it be safe to say they're a better live band than studio?
I would 100% say that, yeah.
I would say that too,
yeah. And they're one of the few bands that I still have yet to see live.
Oh, me too. I'd love to.
I would love to see them live. And until then, we just have to settle for the DVD releases.
Yeah, well, sometimes that's all we get.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, moving on to Moloch. So, what are we thinking about Moloch?
What do you think about
it? This one's hard for me. I want to, and I know I might get some flack, I want to put it in the D.
Okay.
That's just for me, but I'm good to compromise. The main reason was this was the first album that the first track of Park Bench, I believe it is.
Yeah.
I still thoroughly love Park Bench, but once we get past Park Bench, I lose interest immediately. Like I've had this album since it came out, and I've played it a handful of times, and even to this day, I couldn't tell you another track off of this. And yeah, it never connected with me. I love and I appreciate the story and the concept of this.
Yeah, what a concept.
It's a brilliant, and I love how each pressing of the record has a different tone at the end.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Neat.
Because if you listen to the record, and you listen to a CD version, and you listen to the track on Spotify or YouTube, they all have a different tone. Trying to kind of mimic that whole Moloch machine of doing the whole mimicking the sound of the unstruck chord of creation and destroying the entire universe. So yeah, each pressing, I believe, and each CD and each the version that's on Spotify, the tone at the end is different.
Interesting. That's neat.
Yeah. Where would you put it, though? I'm interested to hear where you would put it.
I'm going to put it in C because I was so pumped with Demon that I couldn't wait for the next follow-up, and it disappointed the hell out of me.
Yeah.
I feel very much the same way you do about it. The exception of Park Bench and Choir of Ancestors. Those two songs are really good, but the rest is
Yeah.
I can take or leave.
I 100% agree.
It's got probably one of the best, sorry to interrupt you, one of the best production, I think, of most of their albums. It's very well produced, but fortunately that's not enough to bump it up a few.
Yeah, I would agree. It's definitely one of the best sounding albums. Unfortunately, the music doesn't quite back it up as much. Do you feel comfortable with it in D, or do you feel like it does kind of reign a little bit better? Because I can move it up to a C.
No, I would put it in D because I honestly listen to it as much as I listen to those first three.
Yeah.
It's a rarity.
Yeah, and I'm kind of in the
Definitely.
same. I listen to Missa Atropos much more than I would listen to Moloch. Yeah, I feel good with that. Moving on to Soyuz. So I started with Moloch. Where would you put Soyuz?
I'd put it B and maybe slightly into A.
Interesting. Okay. I'll leave it in B. Tell me a little bit more.
Well, after the disappointment, Moloch was Soyuz just kind of regenerated. What's the word? I just found a whole new appreciation for them.
Yeah, rejuvenized, right?
Yeah, they just sounded back to more of their old ways, their old way of writing or something. There's just something about it, and that pre-recorded drum loop in Soyuz out in Soyuz 1 that gets in my head and it stays there at times for weeks. It almost drives me nuts.
You know what? I 100% agree. I think Soyuz out and Soyuz 1, it gets into my head and I can't physically push it out.
No.
I would put this, I'll leave it in B because I would put this more into the C category. Because I listen to it as much as I listen to Missa Atropos. I did feel burnt by Moloch to the point where I honestly didn't even pre-purchase Soyuz, and only very recently did I consider purchasing it and have subsequently put it on order to kind of finalize my my record collection, because I have all the albums from Night to their latest release, and this was the only one that I was missing. But upon re-listening and getting more into it, I think that they've gotten back onto a very positive course.
Yes. I would agree 100%.
Yeah. So this brings us to the record that they put out last year.
Yes, Fireworker.
Fireworker. Now, where would you put this one?
I'm going to put A.
I agree. there's no course of discussion about that one. I've loved this album, and
It's brilliant.
part of the reason why I love this album so much is that I still don't 100% understand it.
Yeah, I don't think you ever will.
Like
That's what it's got. That's what it does to me too. It's like demon and night crossed. Like a love child between those two, and it just. I think, in 10, 15 years, when we're talking about ranking them again, I think Fireworker will right up there with TikTok and Night.
I really hope so, because the more I listen to it, the more I get out of it, and the more I really, really love it. I can't help but just feel intoxicated about this whole thing, and a lot of that intoxication is like I still don't quite understand it, and anything that I don't understand, I gravitate towards.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. It just sucks you in, and you just want to know what this Fireworker is, or what
Yeah, it's very much.
Awesome.
It's very much like the actual graphic art on here, like the front cover.
Oh, that's another thing we should mention.
Yeah.
Their most of their album covers are spot on with cover art. They just
Yeah, it really is. Like, it's a perfect introduction to the music that's about to be found within it.
Definitely.
Going back really quickly to Soyuz, I think Soyuz is one of their most atmospheric and ethereal albums, and that's found very much in the album work.
I love that cover.
It's beautiful. And Firebringer is very much like, you think you know what it is, and you have an idea of what's going on.
The little parasite that's in us.
Yeah, but then the more you look at it, you're like, well, what actually is it, though?
Yeah.
So, yeah. And that's the last of their albums. Now, I did see in the chat, somebody was asking, can I put this picture on Twitter? I will. I will upload this to Twitter so people can see it, because I know on YouTube and whatnot, it's a pretty small screen if you're watching it on your phone.
Right.
So I have no problem saving this and putting it on Twitter for everybody.
Awesome.
That brings us to the last of it. Anything you want to kind of wrap up? Anything you want to talk about in terms of Gazpacho?
I don't know, what music are you listening to lately? What's tweaking your ears?
I've really, outside of Gazpacho, I've been loving the new album from Divine, I think is what it's called. They're a Scottish metal band similar to The Ocean, and it's spelled DVNE. It's very quickly becoming my favorite album of this year, and I've held off reviewing it because I want to continue to listen to it, because I find once I review an album, I put it on the back burner to start listening to the next album.
It's been that kind of a year with all these releases.
Oh, it's just like one after the other after the other after the other. So I've been listening to that one, and I've also been listening to an upcoming album from another band that I've been loving, and I'm lucky enough to have advanced copies of some of these. So
Nice.
I don't want to give too much away, but it's a band that rhymes with moss. So, and I'm excited to talk about it once I'm able to. So,
Perfect.
yeah. What have you been listening to?
I've been obsessing, other than Gazpacho, with Life Sign's new album, Altitude.
Oh,
wow.
That's right. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I know you were talking about that. Yeah.
I recommend anybody check that one out, as well as your choices, because I'm sure they're top notch as well. But yeah, looking forward to a great year of music.
Oh, it's been like extremely stellar. Like the past 2 years have kind of been lukewarm. I think 2018 was so good in terms of new music that 2019 was really, really good, but I felt like last year it took a while for the good music to start flowing. Like, I don't think it was until like August where I started to get really excited about the new music that I was hearing, rather than just like the music that was coming out. This year, like the first 2 to 3 months was just like banger after banger after banger.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited.
There.
Yeah. because I think this weekend we're getting the new Gojira album
Yeah.
that I'm pretty excited to dive into, and I know Mastodon and Between the Buried and Me, they're both putting out new albums. If you're into like some pretty hardcore metal stuff,
I can take it or leave it. Some of it I enjoy, definitely.
well, I can pump and promote the album or the review that I'm putting out on Friday, which is a how to get into Mastodon. So if you
I'll definitely be watching that.
if you want to find an entry point to Mastodon, this would be a great time to.
Because I need a little bit of help with that one.
Let me tell you, it took me a good 3 years to get into Mastodon. Everybody, like in my friend circle that was into the type of metal that I was listening to, they kept saying, you got to get into Mastodon, you got to get into Mastodon. And I'm like, it is such a jagged pill to swallow.
I've tried, believe me, but I
boy. So I've cataloged how I would recommend getting into Mastodon, because it is quite a rewarding band.
Most once you get into a group and that they deserve your respect, I find that that's what makes great musicians.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think we have a couple more minutes. If anybody has any questions for myself or Brent. It looks like some people are commenting about our tier list, which is great. Blackwater Rust is saying that Fireworker would be an A or B tier. So I think they agree with our placing of it. So yeah, if anybody has any questions before we kind of sign off, yeah, I'll just give that a couple of seconds.
Sure.
See if anybody has anything to add to it. No, I'm not seeing any. But you can always ask myself or Brent questions. We're both pretty active on Twitter and Instagram.
Please don't be shy.
Yeah, I'll leave within the recorded video, I'll leave Brent's contact information in terms of Twitter and Instagram if you want to check it out. I think his collection is one of the few that puts my collection to shame in terms of vinyl and record collections, because it looks like you have pretty much most of their records.
I do.
Yeah, because I'm missing Bravo, When Earth Lets Go, Firebird, and Moloch. Sorry, not Moloch. Soyuz. But I did rectify by ordering Firebird and Soyuz, so they are on their way. But
excellent.
Yeah. Great. Well, I'm not seeing any questions, so I think we will say good evening and good night. I want to extend a huge thank you for Brent for coming on.
I appreciate it very much, and I look forward to doing this again.
Of course, I'll definitely have you on in the future.
It's been awesome.
You've been a huge supporter of mine since practically the beginning, so any thanks that I could give to you. And again, you need to follow Similitude of Prog. Amazing, insightful reviews with such a great passion. So thanks for coming on.
I appreciate everything you have to say, sir.
Yeah, I hope everybody has a great evening, and we'll catch everybody later.
Yeah, take care, everybody. Have a good night. We'll see you again.